All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to the ISD 191 Legislative Committee meeting. Today is Monday, January the 11th, and we will get started momentarily. We have a state representative joining us this evening, so we're gonna wait a couple of minutes for her to hop on, and then we will get started on our introductions. So stand by. And Happy New Year, everyone. Feels like we're 3 months into the year already, and it's only January 11th.
Just check messages to see if we did get an update from our legislator.
Hi, Leslie. Welcome. We're waiting on Representative Hanson, so be a couple minutes. You can get settled in.
Yeah.
I know as soon as I say what else is on the agenda, she'll join, but we'll give her another minute or so, and then maybe we'll just skip to the legislative platform discussion if she's not here, and then we'll go back when she hopefully joins.
Okay.
So I think the other two things on the agenda were discussing the exemption for the sale of district property and then the district's 2021 legislative platform. Dr. Battle, was there something specific around the exemption you wanted to discuss today? I don't recall.
So the representatives that were at the last session, they shared some information and didn't know if board members wanted to kind of clarify what we heard from them. So I remember one question was, do we have to have a specific amount? Do you remember? They were giving us some information about that. So that's the only reason, if there was any follow-up from what you heard, if the board members wanted to discuss it.
I don't think I did for today. Leslie, you were on that call. Was there anything that came up that you wanted to try and get more clarification about? Oh, you're muted.
It's understanding the timing of everything, I think, is trying to recall, and it may be just connecting with because I think it was the other senator. It wasn't Senator Carlson that was giving more of the details, but kind of maybe clarifying what that step process is and the timing.
Right.
Yeah, Lisa, do you remember? Yeah, there was a little different information they were giving us. Do you recall what they were saying about the timing? I have to go back to my notes.
In listening to the conversation, I had the impression that we should have the sale figured so we'd know the amount, because as and this was new representatives that we were talking with, but they would anticipate that they would want to know, what are we talking about for dollars exactly? And it seemed as though that's different from what we had been previously discussing. We thought we needed to have the legislation passed before we did any type of a sale conversation, that would come to a conclusion with something that's ready to be prepared or approved. And I got the sense that it was kind of maybe thought to be the opposite in the timing.
Right.
And the other point was, they said we had to know how we were going to use the money too.
Exactly what for.
That was the other piece.
Yep.
So a little more
Yeah.
detailed than maybe what we thought going into it before, but that's part of why we have these conversations.
Mhm.
So
Would that require, at least I don't know if this is something that got talked about, would that require the board, like authorize a sale pending legislation to approve that? And I guess maybe that'd be up to the board, but say we wouldn't sell it unless we got to use it in that way, the funding in that way.
Wrong button. Yep. Yeah, I think that's a possibility the board could consider.
sorry, my internet blipped in the middle of Aaron talking, so I have no idea what he said.
Just that perhaps that would mean that the board would authorize a sale pending legislation that allows the
sure.
funding to go to the general fund.
Exactly. Which makes sense. I think if I were a legislator, I wouldn't want to just have a blank check piece of legislation passed, essentially, that whatever the amount is. So it makes sense that they would want there to be some sort of a guideline or an approximate amount in the legislation. So I like that suggestion, Aaron, when we get to that point.
So that was the purpose of that, because there was some new information as was shared that
Right.
we're quite aware of.
So as we move forward with possible sales, we'll just need to make clear that, as Aaron was saying, any potential sale would be pending this legislation needing to be approved, and then hoping, I guess, that the timing works out, because the legislature only goes through May. Unless there's a special session, and I don't see the governor calling a special session just for this.
Right. And then there's the wondering of if the amount of debt repayment that would be completed, depending upon which building you're talking about and what sale proceeds are suggested. And so I got a wondering sense from those who were talking last time that they wouldn't expect that the full amount of debt would be paid off first. And so that's just kind of an open-ended wondering of mine.
Was whether or not they would want that to happen first.
Right.
I've also got the sense that I don't think based off of timing, it would happen this legislative session either. I'm thinking it's like next year. With that.
Well, I think it will be challenging in the current environment on January 11th to expect that we would have things move so quickly that we'd be ready for a sale by May, I think. Yeah, maybe. I'm no realtor, but that seems like an awful lot to happen in a relatively short amount of time.
So I wonder if, and I wasn't part of the call, I wonder if, probably not, the legislators would consider a dollar amount up to a particular amount if we know the ballpark that we're expecting. I mean, and
Might.
I don't know.
That would be a conversation worth having, I think, because there's a long time between May and next January when they reconvene. That basically gives us a very short window to try and make it happen and get the legislative approval at the same time.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
And if everything else is spelled out that, up to a certain amount, we
Right.
expect, X amount for this and X amount for that. If there are multiple buckets, then, we certainly could define that as well.
Right.
Okay. So that was the purpose of that, because there, as we shared, there was some new information and some
Right.
new differences than we were thinking, and some we weren't even aware of. So how they were thinking about this.
Like I said, that's why we invite them to learn. It's as much for us to learn as it is for them.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
and I think the other piece of the agenda was discussion around next steps around Can you hear me okay? Around the legislative platform,
Mhm.
where we have the AMSD and MSBA platforms for 2021. And
Mhm.
I don't know, I guess looking at those and from my perspective, what are the pieces of those platforms that are of most or of the highest urgency or highest need for our district. And then also, well, the other thing we were just talking about, the legislative exemption, that would seem to me to need to be high on our any 191 specific legislative platform or discussions for this year. I see Representative Hanson has joined us. Welcome. Glad you made it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt and be late.
No worries. We're glad you were able to join us. So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Scott Hume. I am the current chair of the Legislative Committee. I live in Burnsville, and this is the halfway point of my first term on the school board. So welcome. Maybe we'll just have everybody quickly introduce themselves, and then you can do a little introduction. Oh, we have 2 representatives. Yay. Representative Berg, hello. We're just doing introductions, so you picked the perfect time to call in. Except you're muted, so we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, I was having a little trouble getting in. Sorry about that.
No worries. So I was just saying, I'm Scott Hume. I'm the current chair of the Legislative Committee. I live here in Burnsville and am halfway through my first term as a board member. And I thought we would maybe just start with introductions and go from there. So how about Abigail and Leslie, the 2 of you can go next.
Hi, I'm Abigail Alt. I also live in Burnsville, and I am going on my 8th year on the school board. Welcome.
Hello, I'm Leslie Chester. Like Scott, I'm in the middle of my first term on the school board and going now in my 3rd year. And I am a resident of Eagan.
Good evening, representatives. I'm Superintendent Teresa Battle, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'll turn it over to 2 of our other 191 staff members, Lisa Ryder and Aaron Tinklingberg.
Hi there, I'm Lisa Ryder, Executive Director of Business Services for ISD 191. I've been with the district for 15 years.
And I'm Aaron Tinklingberg, Communications Director for the school district. I've been working in District 191 for about 10 years and have 1 son who graduated from Burnsville High School in 2019.
All right, and Representative Hanson and Berg, maybe the 2 of you could just tell us a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll generally, when we've had other representatives join us, it's been very informal. It's really a chance for us to kind of hear from you and what you're hearing from either your constituents or in the legislature now that you're in session. Chance for us to talk a little bit about kind of what we are identifying as some of our needs and priorities and just things that we may want you to be aware of as you're getting started in the new legislative session. So Representative Hanson, do you want to go first?
Sure. Well, thank you everybody for having us here today. Thanks for putting this on. When I ran, I think I made it really clear that I believe in community-centered leadership, and that means amplifying the voices of this community all the way to St. Paul. This isn't a position where I am out to seek my own agenda or my own power. It's to, again, follow the direction that our community needs us to go to make the changes that we need to happen here. So thank you so much for supporting that vision and for being a community that is so engaged. I have a daughter at Burnsville High School, and just the direction we've gone with Virtual Academy and everything has been a really great experience as a parent. I have not heard anything negative throughout my time. And so I think that's a reflection of how good you all do in your roles and how much the community really appreciates all the hard work you've put in to adapt to this pandemic and to make sure all of our kids are seen, heard, and valued the way they deserve. So thank you again for having me. I will be serving this year on 4 committees: agriculture, behavioral health, human services, and higher education. And so I invite anybody who has questions about those committees to certainly get in touch with me so we can draw some bills and get some work done. If there are other issues not pertaining to those committees, also get in touch with me. Again, part of this is going to be amplifying the things that you thought need to change so much in our system. And I'm here to help support that and be a bridge to that change that we want to make. So thank you again for having me. I will drop my, make sure everybody has my cell phone number before we leave. I have made that public information for everybody. You can also email my house email address, which is rep.jessica.hanson@house.mn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I guess I'll go next. I'm Representative Kayla Berg. I'm on the other side of Justice District in 56B, Burnsville, and then a little slice of Lakeville. And first of all, thank you for having us this evening. I did run as education being a big part of my platform. One of my sons, I've had two go through the Burnsville school system. And one of my sons is kind of what I refer to as a non-traditional learner. So there's been a lot of advocating and a lot of struggling for pretty much all the years that he's been in school. And so education is very personal for me. And the approach that I took when I was speaking to voters was, first of all, making sure that we have full-time school counselors on site at every school. That relationship for my son and for our family was transformative. And so that's really important to me. And as he was in elementary school and middle school, I came to find out that the school counselors were part-time and split between a bunch of different campuses. And it wasn't until he got to Burnsville High School where there was one that he could connect with on a full-time basis. And by then the damage had been done. And so we know that kids can't learn on an empty stomach. Well, they also can't learn if we're not addressing the traumas that they come to school with every day. So that's important to me. As I was speaking with voters while I was campaigning, special education seemed to be a big piece of the education priorities in our district. And so having, moved my son over to the alternative high school once we had the chance, and he went from a class of 40 students down to 12 or 15 students, it was a huge difference. So whatever the learning plan is, whatever the individual student needs, I'm all in. I do serve on the Education Policy Committee, which I'm really excited about, so that we can try to begin to implement some of the conversations that I had into our policy making. And so that's exciting. Please, I would love it if you all would be a resource to me as I'm on this committee, and then vice versa. If you need something from me, let me know. I think that my contact information is public. If not, I'll drop it in the chat. Reach out anytime. And I'm just really excited to start this journey with you all and see how we can take care of our children. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're so glad you were both able to join us tonight. This particular legislative committee is still relatively new. It just started up until 2 years ago when Leslie and I joined. We did not have a legislative committee in the district. And that was something that we saw as a real need. It was something that many of our neighboring districts had and were using to great effect. And it was something that we felt we really needed, both to help us better connect, I think, with the legislators, and so because it's two-way, as I mentioned earlier, it's a two-way where it's as important, I think, for us to learn from you as it is for you to learn from us. So we are really grateful that both of you are able to take some time tonight to join us, so we can just have a conversation. Like I said, it's going to be really informal. I don't have a lot of specific things to talk about, but there are certainly issues that I think you all to be aware of, and I definitely, Director Auld, Director Chester, Superintendent Paddle, definitely please jump in at any time, because I'm not just going to talk for the next 40 minutes. So I think one of the things that we're talking about, actually, just as the two of you were joining, and it sounds like you both live in 191, so you're probably aware that last year we voted to close 3 of our buildings. And we are looking at options for the buildings that are now vacant, specifically the Metcalf Middle School property, as well as some other properties in the district, an outlot at Diamond Head and the River Ridge Center, are the other ones that are also considering our options for potentially selling them. And one of the things that we want, that our understanding of the current law is that if a district sells property, then that the money from that has to go to pay down debt. But there is a legislative exemption that is available if the legislature passes it at our request, that would allow us to use that money instead in our general funds, which would give us a lot more ability to use that in ways that would benefit the students in our district. Colleagues, did I articulate that accurately? I see the heads nodding. Good. So that was one of the things that we've been talking about. We aren't close. We aren't even close yet to the point of needing to actually put pen to paper on what the legislative exemption would look like. Right now, we're really wanting our legislators to be aware that that is something that we do intend to request when the time comes. And I don't know if it's, given that you're both new to the legislature, I would guess it's probably not something that you have, that you're already familiar with what that process would look like.
I have heard of this. It came up on the campaign trail when I talked to a couple of different school board members.
Yeah.
And so I do have a few questions that you may or may not have answers to yet, but just preliminary. One, do you have a lobbyist who will work on behalf of this for you, or is this something that this team will drive?
I don't think we have a lobbyist.
Okay.
I think we are the lobbyist. That's us, not a lobbyist, but yeah.
That's okay. That's why I was just curious.
Yeah.
And then my next question, is this a one-time exemption, or are you looking for this in perpetuity?
I think it would be a one-time, just for that one sale.
It's only one time.
It's right. It's only for that one specific sale for that one specific property. And I would assume we would need one for each property if we ended up selling multiple properties, or they could all be in one piece of legislation potentially if all the sales happen to happen at the same time.
Well, I think legally we only get one exemption. So
Okay.
That's why we would want to be able to lump multiple properties together.
Good clarification. Did you have other questions? Yep.
I'm sorry. So when you say that money would go back into the general fund, can you kind of just give me a couple of examples of what it is that directly impacts the students or the teachers in our school district out of that general fund?
Sure. I mean, the general fund is where the bulk of our money comes from to pay for. Lisa, please jump in if you can explain this better than I can. But the general fund is where the bulk of like teacher salaries, programming costs, all of those things are paid for out of the general fund. So that's really where the bulk of the direct student support funding comes from, that general fund. Anything to add, Lisa?
Current statute currently reads that if once you've paid your debt off related to that particular property, then the sale proceeds go into the general fund capital reserve. And the legislation that we would be looking for would be to allow that to be in our undesignated general fund reserve. So it would not necessarily be required that it's used for capital purposes, but would be able to be utilized as the board saw fit.
And of course, the conversations that the board will have to have is involves, if it is specifically in the general fund, if we happen to get the as we plan for the exemption, what's going to make the most sense that's not going to set us up for future loss. So for example, adding FTE is not a good use of those funds because it's a one-time use. And FTE is obviously salaried and benefits and all of that. So in terms of whether we, if there are other uses within the general fund or if there are capital improvements that we could make that would directly improve the experience of our students in our schools, that's something that we all have to figure out, but we need to be very cognizant of not setting ourselves up thinking that this is ongoing money and knowing that it's only a one-time opportunity.
And do you think that the priorities that the board would set forth to use the money for would be available before we would be required to write and or pass any legislation? And what the oversight would be?
I think they would have to be, based on what we were talking about. Dr. Battle, feel free to chime in, but it sounds like we really need to have our I's dotted, T's crossed, and our report all ready to go before the exemption will be granted. So you would know that.
Wonderful, thank you.
I think I just have one other question about that subject. And I always ask this whenever I'm in these meetings because we all have ears out there and we've all heard things. Do you anticipate opposition to this? And if so, what does that look like?
To the exemption or to selling the property?
The exemption.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's always a potential to object.
Yeah,
I think
good.
Based on the last week. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a community engagement perspective, I think that there's always going to be a handful of people at least who look at it as a lowering taxes opportunity. So if you could pay off some debt, then that potentially lowers taxes for people.
Right.
And so there may be some opposition from people who are really looking to do that. I don't think in our community that would be widespread or very significant. We've had a tremendous amount of support for funding for our schools over the last 8 to 10 years, especially. And I don't think we're talking about, well, I don't know exactly how much money we're talking about dollar-wise, but it's not going to be, in the neighborhood of what our last referendum was or what our last bonding referendum was or anything like that. So I think it would probably just small opposition.
And I think our parents and students are really excited about the expansion of the high school pathways into middle and elementary school. And so to really make those investments at the same time where we are dealing with our financial reality. So I think you'll have a group that any money we can have dedicated to help with our programming and staffing to support our programs, our instructional programs. And then as Aaron said, they are taxpayers too. And as we're all dealing with COVID, our financial situations may have changed. And so we may get some constituents who really believe that we need to take care of the facilities and the tax burden. So.
I also think constituents are going to want to be very clear about how going this route is going to improve the financial situation for the district, or how it goes with, existing debt on the buildings that are sold and such. So the transparency that'll need to happen to really help people see the full picture, it's going to be important.
Fortunately, education funding is really easy to explain and simple, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Totally. The easiest thing ever, right, Lisa? So, is there anything else around the exemption we want to talk about today?
Just let us know when you're ready for that. I think that would kind of be
Absolutely.
The next step for us, and make sure we can get it, kind of put together and the ducks in a row on our side. It's the good news is that there's a big backup in the revisor's office right now. So we got time. We got plenty of time right now. So looking forward to hearing more from you all about that.
Super. All right. I think Just trying to think of what else. So many other things we could be talking about. Let's say, Abigail, do you have a particularly burning issue either one of you wants to bring up next? I think
In terms of legislative priorities.
things that you would like for them to be aware of,
So
especially
I think
as newer legislators representing our district.
I think one thing that I always remind myself of, because, you know, obviously it's been very clear in this district that education funding continues to be a challenge and has been a challenge for many years. It's not new. It's, you know, the formula is lagging, special ed funding is lagging. And at the same, and I know that, you know, you all are, you know, if you're not already fully steeped in it, you certainly will be with conversations with community members. I think the other thing I challenge myself to lobby for and advocate for are the non-funding issues, because those can be just as important in terms of either finding efficiencies or, you know, I always like to bring up the example of the licensure, the teacher licensure pilot that basically it was piloted, I think it was 2 years ago, and it's one of multiple opportunities to welcome a different people with different levels of licensure and knowledge and experience into the teaching profession, thereby diversifying the teaching profession. And allowing for a different path where the people kind of graduate. And I'm sure, Teresa, you can speak much more eloquently to this than I, but that's been one of the things that I've been watching, that, you know, there are those who would say that, you know, it's the pilot itself may not be effective, but again, it's a pilot. And I would simply ask that, you know, it be allowed to run its course so that we can collect data on that and really understand whether it is efficient or not, whether it's accomplishing the goals that we want in terms of diversifying our teaching staff and bringing different levels, different experiences, people with different experiences. Teresa, I'm sure you have more to add to that.
So I do believe both representatives, you were on the AMSD legislative preview. And so there was a presentation from members of AMSD about the topic you just shared about making sure that we have a staff that represents the students that we serve. And so next on the agenda, we actually are going to go take a closer look at that to see what pieces that we may incorporate in our own specific to 191. So yes, I would agree with Chair Alt that we do need to look at that. And so I think it was really helpful to hear from legislators about the priorities. From what I heard from the panelists of the leaders was that it was COVID-19 and the budget. And so we really do want to share with you our take on the things that are most important for us in those two areas. As you know, how we have responded to COVID, unfortunately, it was inequitable across the districts in Minnesota. And just in one area, we at least had learning devices because of a levy. There were some districts, they didn't have learning devices for their students. And so just to pay close attention to those areas. And then looking at your committees that you're on, I see Representative Hanson, the higher ed. So there's some proposals related to our pathways for high schools that I think we might want to be able to be a resource for you too, since that is a key partnership to help launch students into post-secondary, whether it's career, technical, whether 4-year. So we do have a particular approach to pathways and have some perspective on that. So I would just add that one to directors too. And so when we talk about the per pupil, it's good that we do differentiate. So the older students, we do get more per pupil, but it's not enough for the rising cost of what it is to educate those students in those pathways. And so that's a continual struggle.
I would just make mention of the fact that ISD 191 has had declining enrollment for a long period of time. And so for us, that the formula, and when they changed the referendum levy so that it was only those that were served and not residents, all of that kind of shifted exactly what it meant to us as a school district with declining enrollment. So moving into this next year, particularly because of the impact of COVID, and not just the impact it had at our kindergarten levels, where a lot of kindergartners did not necessarily come to school this year in a normal course. And in addition, our ability to actually reach the families relating to the educational benefits application and the impact that has on the compensatory formula. Those are two key things that are on top of mind for me from a business sense, because I am concerned that if we're held to the free and reduced eligibility that many of us were able to have families complete, it may be much lower than what we normally see. When families are not necessarily having to pay for their lunches, it just doesn't, the connection as to how important that particular application is just doesn't make sense to them. So we made a great deal of effort to reach our families. It's just really difficult sometimes to explain that, and particularly in the national environment that we're in, you know, there's just a lot of hesitancy around completing that application at this time of year. So.
Really good points, Lisa. Thank you. Yeah, I think the impact of COVID has definitely been, obviously, it's been profound in every aspect of every person in the entire world's life at this point. So what we're saying probably isn't shocking to hear that it's also had a huge impact on our schools, but it has. So thank you, Dr. Batto. Thank you, Lisa, for kind of helping to articulate some of those very real challenges that we've had, and also some of the opportunities, like the fact that we did have a leg up compared to many of our other districts across the state, and that we did already have devices for all of our students, which we were very fortunate, thanks to our voters approving that levy back in 2014, I believe it was, or 2015. So that's very huge, but that doesn't change some of the other impacts of this past year. And definitely, I think, looking at the enrollment issue, the free and reduced lunch applications are definitely going to be two challenges. And again, not just within from what I've heard, and I think from what many of us have even just seen on the news, that's an issue certainly statewide and probably nationwide, that I know there are a number of districts that typically have increasing enrollment that had declines this year, in part because of the kindergarten, largely because of kindergarten and students not enrolling this year. So definitely appreciate any continuing support on that. Trying to think if there's any other major priorities. Have we talked about, I know Representative Berg, you mentioned special education was something that is near and dear to you, and I know that's something that has been I don't want to use the word challenge, but financially it's been a challenge for us with the financial cross subsidy in our district, where we have programs that we are appropriately required to offer, but the funding doesn't necessarily come to pay for those programs. And so a large amount of our budgetary challenges can also be traced back to some of the special ed cross subsidy and the additional costs that go into that. So I think that's something else that if that alone were ever addressed statewide or even at the federal level, that would have an enormous impact on the students in our district and other districts as well.
Yeah, actually, one of my campaign team members is a special education teacher in Minneapolis, and she was just a fantastic resource. And it's my understanding that most of the school districts are suffering in this area because the federal dollars that are allotted to the special education programs in the states are not being distributed correctly. And so is there, I guess what I'm asking is the state then providing any of that money? And it sounds like even if they are, it's not enough. So truly the solution has got to be somehow holding the federal government accountable for those promised dollars.
Yeah, yes, I think that's the case. And I think there's an added complexity this COVID impacted year in the fact that if you don't know of it now, as you learn more about maintenance of effort, that's another big concern for a lot of districts, because maintenance of effort is referring to the state funded maintenance of effort. And if we have federal dollars to assist us through COVID, that actually can take away from the dollars we're showing then under the state. And the result, if you don't meet maintenance of effort, is general fund dollars are then taken from you. So that's a real worry and concern for a lot of districts across the state.
And I think, one thing I would just ask, as you work through the various committees that you're on, excuse me, that, each school district is unique and different. And so as you look at the, the proposals, the bills that are coming at you, and looking at them in terms of local control and those unique differences. So for example, Representative Berg is counselors in our schools. And, for one district, there may be counselors in every school. In our district, for example, we have partnerships to support social emotional health of our kids. We have social workers, we have cultural liaisons, we have multi-layers. So that's an example where, each district kind of manages their staff and their programming differently. And it's not just staffing, it's also, facilities. Different districts have different needs in terms of the age of their facilities. And so I think just keeping that filter alive in terms of, how these decisions will expand or limit local control, because I really appreciate my fellow board members and the decision making that we have implemented together, and in terms of understanding our families and our students, we really take to heart, providing them with the best service and being able to, be nimble and make those decisions that we need to really serve the unique needs of our students.
Another staffing area where there was a remarkable difference across the state, we have nurses in our schools. And so being in the midst of a health pandemic, we had a wonderful resource to help educate us and to support us and take on additional roles such as the contact tracing. And there were districts that simply didn't have the nursing capacity to help with this piece. So I just wanted to point that out at some of the varied decisions that districts make. And who knew we would have a pandemic, but we were a little better well poised as far as that staffing.
Well, I'm very heartened to hear that. Thank you. When my son was in elementary school at Neal, and then over at Nicollet, the school counselors that was our experience. Of course, he's a senior. Well, he's finishing up some credits this year. So that was a number of years ago when we were experiencing the frustration with not having counselors. So I am really heartened to hear that, because again, once we finally did have that one full-time person, it was just transformative. And it's like, that just like makes my mom heart want to make sure that all children have that. So thank you for sharing that with me. That's really wonderful.
That's great. I don't know that are there any other issues that we want to bring up this evening? I feel like this has been a great start to some conversations. I know the two of you I know have a lot going on. You definitely have your hands full, both as new representatives during a global pandemic. I can only imagine how challenging it probably is for you right now. So, but are there any other questions or comments or anything people want to bring up before we wrap up this portion of tonight's meeting?
I just want to thank you again for being here and for making time to be with us. It's really great to have this connection, and you know, one of the silver linings, I suppose, of being in a pandemic is that these meetings are now taking place, you know, because we can meet virtually and kind of schedule that. So yeah, when we can get together to have these conversations when you have time, it's always appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. I'll just say for me, it's my pleasure. You know, Jess and I won elections in a global pandemic, relatively low visibility in our communities. So we don't know any other way but to have these kind of victories. So I completely appreciate this partnership we're building. I know at one point last summer, Dr. Battle and I were filling backpacks for brain power lunches for our community members. So I've seen firsthand, not just of a mother of two boys that have gone through the public school system here, but really the leadership and the caring that our leadership and education have in our community. And it's a really good feeling, and it makes me even more happy to advocate for the things that we need for ourselves. So thank you.
Yeah, I just also wanted to add, thank you both for being joining us today too. I am also a parent of a non-traditional learner, so I'm a huge advocate in terms of special ed in our district, and supports and services for our students. And any way that, knowing that you serve on the Education and Policy Committee, if there's any way that we could be of service to you in providing any resources or support, we would love to join you in that partnership.
Thank you. That'll be great. Always reach out. The information's on the website, and I'll drop my actual info.
Yes, thank you to you both for joining us.
Yes, and thank you again for hosting this tonight. I know that a lot of times, you know, these are the positions that oftentimes just operate behind the scenes. And so I just want you all to know that I see you. This is great. This is what community work is all about. I'll cry if I talk about it too much, because it's so important that we have people like you that care about our kids so much. And when I was running my campaign, I said, I care about the kids in this district just like they were my own. And having the Pathways program, things like that are just amazing opportunities. I'm a first-generation college graduate. My parents were extremely poor. And seeing that there's opportunities like the Pathways program to be expanded all the way down, I cannot say loudly enough how impactful those sorts of things are to families that are struggling like mine were. And I didn't have that opportunity. I found college much later. So helping these kids get a pathway to college and get a pathway to a career or what they're looking to do is really life-changing. So thank you for all the energy you put into it. Thank you for being amazing public servants. And I hope that Kayla and I can do you all justice and make sure that we're fighting for things as strongly as we need to. So my LA knows that if any of you request a meeting, that my local folks in my community and my constituents always get priority. So I will, you know, prioritize meeting with you over a statewide organization every single day of the week. And so I've left my Fridays pretty open. And so those are the days that if the rest of my week books up and somebody in the local community needs me, Friday is the day that I can usually make that. So I just wanted to let you all know that. I'll also put my phone number in the chat. And thank you. Please stay safe and continue to take care of yourselves and keep doing the awesome work you've been doing.
Well, thank you to you both. It's been a really good conversation. I think, you know, you're not even 2 weeks into your term, so I think it's safe to say this is not the conversation. It is the first conversation of probably many that we'll have over the next couple of years. So we definitely look forward to continuing to develop that relationship and working with both of you and all of our other outstanding legislatures this year and beyond. So big thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I suppose the rest of us can stay on. Should we take 10 minutes to talk about the legislative platform? That was good. I love it when our legislators join us for these meetings.
That was a really good conversation.
So, so what we have is in the background papers, the AMSD and MSBA platforms that have been approved for this year. And I guess what I'm curious about is how you all would like to proceed with. We can't have everything be a priority. Presume if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, as they say. So, what are your thoughts on how we could go about making? I don't know, Aaron. I don't recall. Do you recall how many priorities do we have with that platform you created a couple years ago? It was less than half a dozen, I think. Was it just 4?
4.
Okay, yep. That seems like a good number to me because it's a small enough number that it's manageable, but it's big enough that we can get kind of the big pieces in. So,
and just for reference, I've got it pulled up here. I don't know that I necessarily need to share it unless you want to see it, but number 1 was general education funding. Number 2 was special education. Number 3 was school safety, specifically around social, emotional, and mental health needs of students. And number 4 was early childhood funding around the voluntary pre-K program, making sure the funding for that stayed in place.
And then at the ELT, we took a look at where there was commonality between those two. And so one of the items is that, the cross subsidy, but then per pupil formula. And then one that Abigail mentioned is about targeted funding for the diversifying. And then I thought there was one more that was common in
diversifying the workforce.
Yeah. So
I guess the only question is, I remember when the pre-K funding was added as a goal, there was a lot of energy around that and concern about it going away. Are we aware that still exists, or?
Hey, Lisa.
We will go back to our original approved amount, which is I think 108 from the 144 otherwise, because we were originally approved. But so what is up for debate is the difference. Does that make sense?
Yep. I would say I'm kind of here as an honorary member tonight since Eric couldn't make it. My only thought is, do we want to add one policy, because we're pretty funding intensive, and is there like a theme of policies, or 1 or 2 policies that would be particularly helpful? Because I know I've heard from folks that if we can come with both funding and policy requests, it provides a little more balance. That's it.
I agree.
I will
don't want everything to be funding related.
I will share from that AMSD, the panelists, so it was recorded. Both leaders, the House and Senate, said this year's COVID and budget, and next session will be policy. Because there was a question about their support for the constitutional amendment, and they both said probably not this year. We want to discuss it, but we have COVID and budget, so policy next year. So I think it's good because they are going to consider the policy. And so that prompted me, that constitutional amendment is one example. They'll be asking districts, what do you think, if they do bring it up this session? So,
but when you say next session, you mean as in 2022, the session that will start next January?
Because they have so much to do with COVID. Sure. But they said if they do want to have a debate over the constitutional amendment. So that was just the one policy they mentioned the entire time.
Okay. So I wonder if for this year, the platform should be more funding focused, and then next year's, like in the fall, we would start to work on a policy or a platform for 2022 that would address some of the policy needs, perhaps.
Right. And if they do bring up any policy, if they have time, we still have this committee structure. I think you could discuss it and say,
Right.
we need to weigh in on this.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
If anything comes out that would affect us. For sure.
MSBA, because I thought there were a few policies in the MSBA too.
The ones, policy. I was thinking the funding ones.
There were a couple policies.
Mhm.
I haven't, it's been a month. So
Yeah, I was just pulling up the improving staff recruitment retention, promoting expanded learning time and opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just like, have to scroll through and get the whole.
And then making
Exact
instruction
details.
individualized to the student.
Right.
That's the other one.
Yeah. Redesigning schools to promote individualized learning. Yeah.
Mhm.
So one of the things that caught my attention, and we talked about flexibility, I think, here in this committee and maybe in ELT as well, that local flexibility and flexibility in general to sort of change the way school is structured. So one thing that caught my eye in the AMSD platform was under the reduce mandates and encourage innovation was the idea of implementing a competency-based education model in lieu of seat time requirements. And I don't know that I know the tales of that, that I really understand but that seems like one of those things where we're held in such a tight space because seat time drives up so much of what we do.
Well, I know in MSBA, when Scott and I were at the delegate assembly, it was discussed, the concept of internships and apprenticeships, that doesn't count for seat time, and yet it's still learning. So,
Right.
to your point, Aaron.
Perfect example.
Mhm.
Yes. Mhm. Okay. So I believe if you refresh my memory, so once it was decided you would limit to the 4 or 5 items, Aaron would then bring something, mock something up. So I just have a
Create
question
like a
about next
visual.
steps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure
then-
about next steps.
And then I think once the visual is created, it's something that can be shared, or that like on days on the Hill, if we can actually go visit our legislators, or if we do virtual calls or ask people to be committed, that we're letting our constituents know. And that if there's advocacy, we want them to do around it, have the talking points that we're asking, we're wanting them, like if it comes to, we need to call our legislators because we want to, make sure, I don't know if we can get all districts to do this, but like it's this day on the Hill where we want to make sure that they're putting forward a formula of 2 and 2 or 3 and 3 or whatever, that we give our constituents a sample script of calling their legislator and saying a consistent message, based off of what our priorities are or what we're asking.
The only thing I would add to that is, the visual that Aaron mocks up and, whatever messaging, just bring that forward as a report or in a workshop so the board can discuss it.
That was a question that we had. Is that something that the board needs to approve officially, or does it not necessarily?
I know that districts do approve their legislative platform, but if it's a visual and supporting materials, I'd leave it up to the board to figure out.
So I'm hearing right now 3 items clearly: the cross subsidy. Do we want that to include special education and English language, basically all of the areas?
Yes.
The perfect bowl general formula. Is there a number that we want to put in that? In the last legislative platform, we asked for 5%.
I didn't see if that was outlined in MS. I mean, I saw the bullets of the number, like there's 9 for MSBA. I didn't know if it defined.
MSBA is asking for 2 and 2
Two.
to the general fund.
And I think tie it to the inflation index.
Yeah.
Index the
Yes, correct.
formula to inflation.
Right.
I
And
think
the other interesting piece that MSBA, and I don't recall if it's also on the AMSD platform, is a desire to hold districts harmless if they have fewer students this year, because so many districts statewide have fewer students due to COVID. Advocating for that you would get your funding based on whichever was the higher number between fall of 2019 and fall of 2020.
So that would be the third one.
Yeah, I was going to say that might be the third one. And then the targeted funding for supporting a more diverse workforce was the other one that I heard.
Yeah. Did you say the legislative exemption? I really feel like the legislative exemption.
And the legislative exemption. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because that's the one that's the most specific to us. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So maybe we have 5. Which is still a manageable number, I think.
So then we'll work that up. Does that come to the February committee or it goes to a workshop for discussion?
I think it would come to us. I mean, we have the workshop next week. I don't think it would be ready by next week. And then I doubt there'd be another workshop before next month's legislative committee meeting anyway. So I would say let's have that be the focus of next month's agenda.
Okay.
For whoever is on the legislative committee next month, since we'll be having our organizational meeting this week and likely to have a couple new members by next month.
Right.
So let's plan on that for February.
Okay. Thanks.
All
Aaron,
right.
did you need anything else, or Lisa with that? Well,
I think that clarifies things for me, and I can mock something up. I don't know if there's a way to like share a draft and get responses back so that if there are things that I don't capture correctly.
I mean, you could share it as a Google Doc, but I don't know if you use translates well to Google.
Yeah, no, I'll figure out a way to do that. I just
Yeah.
want to make sure that was kosher with the committee structure and everything. But there's not any. Abigail, you're shaking your head. No.
Yeah, I'm more conservative when it comes to that. Having the conversation about the document in the meeting so that it's part of the meeting, but that's me.
That's fine. Let's do that. I'd rather do it by the book. All right. There's nothing else. I think we're done about a half hour earlier than last month. So
yeah.
enjoy the rest of your evening.
All right.
Yeah,
Adjourn
have a good-
6:03. Thank
Okay.
you.